This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Okay. So this one I'm sort of throwing together at the last minute. Got to get this thing recorded and edited before Sunday. So I'm jumping in here and not trying to waste too much time with the opening mantra. It is Retro Monday here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. We got Retro Raw to get into. Make sure you subscribe, comment, and give the show a like for me. We are the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. Here on YouTube and Rumble every week for new shows and new content. With the exception of the weeks where I can't do shows for work-related purposes, which is what the Friday situation is going to look like this week. But I think I already talked about that last week, so I don't need to do another status update. But that's why I'm kind of pressed for time here. I have to do all this a day earlier because I won't have time to do anything on Sunday before I leave. So let's dive in with the content and get into the Raw report, because this is also going to be a long one. It was a 2-hour show, and there is a lot of material to get through. So first and foremost, I guess we need to start calling this show Raw is War. Yeah, this is another one of those landmark episodes. We got new opening graphics, opening pyro, new stage setup, crowd pans at the beginning. They certainly made an upgrade in terms of presentation, I would say. And for the time, it was absolutely a change made for the better. It gave the show a more gritty, edgy flair to it, which, I mean, it's not to say they weren't already achieving a lot of that with some of the recent things they were doing on TV, but the visual changes were kind of the icing on the cake. Kind of an odd location for them to debut the Raw is War pilot show. Worcester, Massachusetts. Not to be confused with Worcester, Ohio. My old stomping grounds before I moved closer to Cleveland. And it was definitely something I had to adapt to as a younger fan growing up. Typically, I was never a fan of the big in-your-face type presentation with wrestling. WCW had already been formatting their shows the same way over the last couple years, so I was kind of used to seeing it. Over time, though, I really have grown to hate this particular type of wrestling presentation even more. God, especially now that every major company does it, and it's been done that way for almost 30 years now. The whole loud, off-the-wall, overly theatrical way pro wrestling's been done, where everybody's screaming to the top of their lungs, is just nonstop in your face the entire time. You know, it really makes me yearn for the territory days when things were, I don't know, more mature, less obnoxious, where the announcers could just talk to me like a regular human being. I'm not trying to immediately downplay everything about the Raw is War vibe. Wasn't always my flavor, but I get why it needed to be done. And it definitely made the show come off livelier. So that's definitely a good sign. I just prefer the old school approach. It's what I mainly grew up on, and it's hard to adjust my outlook on things, especially now that I'm old and crusty. But whatever. So we started with Sycho Sid coming out for an interview with JR. And one of their themes for the show this week was on the topic of Sid and Taker teaming up in the main event. A rather puzzling topic when all was said and done. But I'll break that down as we go through the show. We know their opponents for the title at WrestleMania. So Sid comes down to start the promo. And I shit you not, the very first line after JR asked him to confirm whether or not he would team with The Undertaker later on, Sid fucks up the very first statement when he goes, "The Undertaker must take me as some type of fool." I have no idea what he was attempting to say, but he almost caught himself. Off to a great start with Raw's War. A botch in the middle of Seg 1. Couldn't ask for anything better. So he basically tells Taker that he will not team with him later on, and that he should stay in the cemetery, because that's where he's going to end up after Sid beats him at WrestleMania for the title. That brings out Taker to confront him. This is also where I wrote, "And so begins the 30-year trope of layered guys coming out with their individual entrances to cut promos on each other. And while the one guy's doing all the talking, everyone else has to stand in the ring with a moop face and listen the whole time." It wasn't as egregious here as some of the stuff we've seen in the modern era, where they do this like 8 or 9 times in one segment. But the seeds were planted. So Taker tells Sid that he will be the one to decline the offer to team up tonight, because, well, if I'm being blunt, I honestly had no idea what Undertaker's logic was here. He said, "The reason I won't team with you tonight is because if something happens to you, Sid, then I don't get my shot for the title. But if something happens to me, well, then you get to walk away with the belt." So he's saying that if Sid gets injured or whatever, Taker doesn't get a title shot. But if Taker gets injured, well, he still doesn't get a title shot. So in other words, they shouldn't have this match because it puts the WWF title match at WrestleMania in jeopardy should somebody get injured. Which begs the question, why the fuck did they book the match in the first place? All I know is that Paul Bearer interrupted and came out with Mankind and Vader to cut a promo. And he basically called Taker and Sid cowards for not wanting to wrestle tonight. And this part was great. Right as Taker tries to respond and go, "Listen up," before he can say anything else, Vader and Mankind hit the ring to start a brawl. Apparently they had no interest in hearing what The Undertaker had to say. And this is where we get one of those goofy angles where they try to do something crafty, but the whole thing just comes off ridiculously phony in execution. So as they're fighting, you see Taker with his back turned to Sid, and as Sid and Vader are going at it, Vader turns to look over his shoulder at Taker because he's supposed to cold cock him in the back of the head. And then when Sid goes to punch Vader, Taker turns around and sees Sid standing there. So he's supposed to presume that Sid sucker punched him or whatever. The campy part in the whole thing was the fact that Vader had to turn to look over his shoulder before he punched Taker. Then he had to quickly turn around and eat a punch so he could bump right before Taker turned around. Elsewise, it would have completely fucked up the whole thing. It was silly. And of course, Taker and Sid had their stare down right before the break. All which leads to them coming back. And we have no idea what happened. The last thing we saw was Sid and Taker staring at one another. And when they come back, they're about to pitch to the ring for a Rocky Maivia match. So allegedly they kissed and made up. They lived together in harmony and decided not to punch each other's lights out. That part to me was even more baffling than them doing the whole angle, period. The fact that they just left everyone on a cliffhanger and never followed up with it. Which is not too atypical for a lot of Russo booking ideas we're about to see in the coming year. This was just a prelude to it. It wasn't a terrible segment, but like I said, it set the precedent for a lot of these opening Raw monologues we would end up getting from here on out. Not to say I was ever anti-promo to open up a wrestling show, but when that became the standard thing for like the next 3 to 5 years straight, that's when it started to become ridiculous and overbearing. At least this was wrapped up in about 10 minutes. Some of the later opening sermons we'd get were usually in the ballpark of 15 to 20. And if Hunter was talking, sometimes 25 to 30, give or take. So this wasn't bad, just not a great way to kickstart the Raw is War era. We did get Rocky Maivia versus Tony Roy, which is mainly comical in the sense that while Rocky was beating up Roy, Bob Backlund was at the top of the ramp cutting a scathing heat promo on Rocky while the Sultan and the Iron Sheik were holding a random interviewer hostage. Why were they holding a random interviewer hostage? Beats the fuck out of me. I don't have a clue. Kind of like how I have no clue how the Sultan is getting an Intercontinental title shot at WrestleMania. They're doing the Sultan versus Rocky for the title, which not only do I have zero memory of ever seeing, I didn't even remember they booked Rocky on WrestleMania 13. So Rocky won in about 90 seconds with a crossbody dive. Then he and the Sultan fought for a minute before Rocky's shit cannon left with Tony Atlas of all people, who literally just appeared from out of nowhere and hopped the guardrail and was never seen again for the rest of the program. The context we got for this alignment was Tony Atlas and Rocky Johnson were former tag partners. So logically, Tony Atlas should be in Maivia's corner at WrestleMania when he defends the belt, right? Remember all, this is the era where things were not very well planned out, and the head writer was a fucking nutcase who had the worst case of ADHD in wrestling history at that point. Until Tony Khan came along and took that gold medal with ease. I should also remind you, this is a 2-hour show. This whole segment was rushed and thrown together in about 3 minutes. that is a clear-cut sign that you have way too much crap going on. Probably needed to trim down on the amount of bullshit. For example, speaking of things that needed trimming, this completely random AAA six-man tag match with Heavy Metal, Pentagon, and Peroth versus Octagon, Latin Lover, and Hector Garza. God bless Hector Garza. Nothing against him personally. But out of the entire talent pool involved here, he was the only name I knew remotely anything about. And I still had no desire to see him wrestle in this match. The crowd evidently did not give a shit. And why would they? It's 6 random AAA guys that we've never seen on television before. Maybe like 2 or 3 of them had an appearance in the 97 Rumble match. I'd have to go back and check because that's how unmemorable the whole thing was. And yeah, I know WCW was doing stuff similar to this around this time. La Parka was a big name that had gotten over with the WCW market. Guys like Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio and Juventud, they were gaining a lot of traction in the eyes of the fans. But you also have to remember that we're comparing Mysterio and Guerrero to guys like Latin Lover and Heavy Metal. Not exactly comparable in terms of star power. At least recognizable mainstream star power. So while they're having this relatively sloppy match that nobody cared about, they went to a crowd shot at one point to show Chyna mindlessly sitting around watching the show as a fan. And so that led to her being escorted out of the building by security for no reason. Because even though she bought a ticket to see the show, she was still considered a threat to interfere. Which I guess makes sense considering her track record as of late. I did like how Vince immediately insinuated that she was going to get involved in the program later on, so that escorting her away was a good call. To which Lawler goes, "Yeah, and what if she bought a ticket?" And he's got a point. And to be fair, it's not like she was sitting anywhere near ringside. She was practically in the middle of a giant clump of bodies. Like, even if she was going to try to hit the ring later on, that would have taken a hell of a lot of effort to wedge through those fans. Security would have gone to her before she'd even hop the rail. Oh, I'm sorry. Caveat. If this were real. We also had Brian Pillman doing a mid-match promo where he plugged an appearance for Shotgun Saturday Night. He made a reference to the gun angle with Austin from last year, which, albeit, was kind of funny. The forbidden angle that we're not supposed to ever reference. Meanwhile, everybody still talks about it. Despite that it led to nothing, it was never addressed in storyline after the fact. Here's what I wrote about everything else. Somebody won with something. Didn't care enough to go back and rewatch to find out. And I won't lose sleep over it either. That brought us to Ahmed Johnson versus Roy Raymond. Now this I did lose sleep over. Mainly because I had to watch Ahmed work a singles match. Even worse, it was an Ahmed singles match that also sucked ass. In the 2 minutes they wrestled, Ahmed nearly killed Raymond attempting to dump him over the top rope to the floor. They only got to work for maybe 15 seconds before they queued up the Nation of Domination music and played it through the entire match, while the group stood on the stage watching, which is only mildly infuriating. Ahmed won with a Pearl River plunge. Then Farouk did a promo calling Ahmed an Uncle Tom. Talked about the troubled life of growing up in these streets. And how after their street fight at WrestleMania, the nation is going to show Ahmed what it's really like fighting in the streets of Chicago. How would they know? Did Ron Simmons ever fight in the streets of Chicago? So Ahmed got to retort back. Oh, actually, Farouk set up the next part when he told Ahmed that he was going to bring the entire nation with him to Chicago. Meanwhile, Ahmed was going to show up alone with nobody to watch his back. Which led to Ahmed cutting, truthfully, one of the better promos he ever cut during his career. Mainly due to the fact that you can understand more than 50% of what he was saying. Well, first he called Farouk an overdressed Choco-wearing clown. Or something along those lines. And then he set up the reveal that Farouk can bring the nation with him to Chicago. But Ahmed is going to bring the whole damn city. Which is their way to reveal the Legion of Doom coming out to Ahmed's aid here. In the most counterintuitive way imaginable, I should add. There was a lot of stuff that happened this week. Easily the most awkward part of the entire show was having to wait for like a full minute for Hawk and Animal to walk through the crowd to get to the ring. Meanwhile, the nation just have to stand at the top of the ramp with dicks in hand waiting around. And I'm sitting there like, I'm pretty sure the entire nation could have run down, jumped Ahmed, and left by the time Hawk and Animal got to this fucking ring. That is how long it took for them to get down there. They're doing like 3 or 4 crowd shots. The camera guy's obviously confused as to what shot he's supposed to go to because he's just shooting aimlessly at nothing. And finally, the babyfaces all get to the ring so Hawk could do the goofy promo, promising that the nation would all end up like a giant pile of sweat socks after WrestleMania. And then Ahmed brought everything home by doing the "You're Going Down" chant with the crowd joining in. It was a fine segment when we got past the Ahmed squash. Although, was this reveal of the Road Warriors supposed to be a big surprise? Because if so, they totally spoiled that return when they showed Hawk and Animal on TV the other week. I mean, it seemed like this is supposed to be a big shock factor of seeing the Road Warriors back in the WWF. But we totally saw them on TV a week ago in one of those pre-tapes they aired. So I kind of failed to see where the shock value came into effect here. I also could have done without the childish, goofy Hawk promo, where the only person it's solely designed to pop is Vince McMahon and nobody else. Figures he would laugh at the stupid sweaty socks joke. Meanwhile, everybody else rolls their eyes and sitting there like, oh, come on, really? Thought we were done with that kind of bad humor. It's definitely not in the same ballpark of humor as what they're doing with Owen Hart and the British Bulldog. Before I talk about their match with the New Blackjacks, I just want to briefly plug last week's Raw review I did. If you didn't hear me break down the European Championship finals between Owen and Davey, go watch that review right now. Truly, I think that match is widely underrated in the scope of WWF matches from the late 90s. I still don't ever recall seeing that match as a kid growing up. So when I got the chance to sit and review it the other week, holy cow, what a treat that was. Such a tremendous fucking match. I wish more people would talk about it. And one of the stories coming out of that match was Owen being all bitter and resentful over Davey winning the title, even though he was trying to hide it on camera by being all friendly with Bulldog after the bell. So JR is trying to follow up with that this week as they're making their way down to the ring. And Owen's trying to blow him off and tell JR to go piss up a rope. Stop trying to drive a wedge into their already broken relationship. It was great stuff, as always. The kind of wrestling humor that actually works and never gets old. And Owen was a master at it. So I believe this is our first look at Bradshaw and Barry Windham together as the new Blackjacks. I like how Howard Fink billed them from Texas. Not a particular location in Texas, just the state of Texas. That is where they are from. Now, I do remember briefly touching on the new Blackjacks when they were airing promos on them. It pretty much got over the same way the new Rockers gimmick got over. Meaning that it didn't get over because the gimmick sucked. Bradshaw toning up the Texas accent was pretty hilarious. But, I mean, yeah, this is doomed to fail from the start. So they began this match by breaking down into a four-way. And then to steal one of my favorite Brian Alvarez quotes, it broke down into a tag match. Another split screen here while the heels were working over Owen. We had Vader, Mankind, and Paul Bearer plugging the main event for later on. Best part was him creepily staring into the camera at first. And as Vince was hesitating to ask a question, at the precise moment he tried to get Vader's insight on the main event, Vader interrupted and snarled at the camera. And so Vince responded by going, "Oh, well, thank you." Comedic timing is everything. So the Blackjacks literally spent like 5 minutes working over Owen and Davey. Owen finally made a comeback at the end, even though he and Bulldog are technically still heels. Here they were working babyface, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but I'm not going to try and rationalize it. All I know is that Owen put Bradshaw on the sharpshooter, and then right as Bulldog and Windham tried to get into it, Bulldog shoved the ref down for the DQ because it was apparently too risky for them to beat the new Blackjacks on TV. Despite that Owen and Davey are the champions and are set to defend the tag belts against Mankind and Vader in like 2 weeks. But no, we can't beat the Blackjacks because there's a shred of hope that they'll actually get over and people will care about them in the future. Oh wait, that won't ever happen. Well, shit. Too late now. I mean, it wasn't a good match before the shitty fucked finish. That also didn't help. I really don't have much else to add beyond what I've already said about the gimmick. Go watch Owen Hart versus Davey Boy in the finals of the European title tournament. It was the best title match you were ever going to see with the European belt. And that's me saying that after having not seen any title defenses yet. No, I promise you that over the next how many years that thing is around, nothing involving that title will come close to what Owen and Davey did the other week. Not even in the same stratosphere. So before I talk about the next meaningless squash that took place, here's what I wrote down about some of the ECW stuff for the week. Part 1 of it. Yeah, you guys remember that. The ECW invasion of 1997 that apparently everybody holds to high praise. Well, here's how these bimbos decided to further the story this week. Taz and Bill Alfonso come out to try to confront Lawler at the commentary desk. And as they're choking each other out, Sabu flies in from out of nowhere, cannonballs himself out to the floor through a conveniently placed breakaway table that Taz and Lawler were conveniently standing next to. And then Sabu ate shit, missed both of them, and landed through the table. I'm not joking. That is what happened. Why was the table there? Why did Sabu run out? Where and how did he get the chair to do a running start for the suicide dive he always does? Who was he aiming for? None of these questions have answers. Because the guy that probably booked the segment never thought about the details. For him, it was always about the Crash TV element. The payoff, so to speak. Not the actual logic behind the payoff. So yeah, that was incredibly dumb. Also dumb was Miguel Perez versus Leif Cassidy. That happened. Do I need to remind you all that the WWF was in the middle of getting their asses reamed in the ratings war around this time? Miguel Perez versus Leif Cassidy in a cold match nearing the top of hour 2. Even better, a cold TV match that also sucked and had no heat. Perez won with a roll-up in about 3 minutes. Nothing else to say. I do, however, have stuff to say about the Sid promo they aired in the locker room. Not even so much the material necessarily. Just more confusion over the whole concept of what's going on with the main event situation. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I know it was only maybe 20 minutes ago where we talked about Sid and Undertaker refusing to team up later on. Come to find out, we are in fact getting Mankind and Vader versus Undertaker and Sycho Sid. And it would seem now that Sid and Taker are perfectly fine teaming together. Well, that was certainly a plot twist I didn't see coming. So what you're telling me is, they didn't want to team up at the beginning of Raw, but now they do want to team up because they discussed their issues and settled them over a hot cup of joe in the back? I have no idea what the fuck's going on. The only thing I do know is that they're booking Bret Hart versus Sycho Sid next week in a cage, which I would think is way more of a dangerous match to put your world champion in just days before he has to defend the title at WrestleMania. Taker's not protesting that match. Now, that's fine for Sid to wrestle there. It is much more dicey to book Sid in a regular tag match against Vader and Mankind, though, where he apparently has a much greater risk of getting hurt. Because, you know, booking logic. So then we finally arrive at the Ken Shamrock promo. I think this was technically the top of the hour. Which, by the way, am I crazy or did this Raw get an overrun? It was much longer than normal. I don't remember Raw having overruns back in the late 90s. If it wasn't that, it was them cutting back on commercial time. Because this whole show is a little over 90 minutes in overall runtime. And I'm used to the shows being somewhere around 70 minutes most weeks. Maybe the commercials were shorter. I don't know. Still too much stuff going on. But I digress. So Ken Shamrock, there's a name that's about to become synonymous with the Attitude Era. You know, here's the funny thing. I actually don't have as many memories of Shamrock being the guest referee for Brett versus Austin like I do Mike Tyson being the guest enforcer for Shawn versus Austin the following year at 14. But when he came out and did this promo talking about Vince signing him to be the referee for the submission match, even though the whole thing came together only in the last couple weeks before the show, it made perfect sense on paper. And I think people sometimes forget, too, just how big Ken Shamrock was in the MMA world around this time. And when I say big, I'm not just talking in terms of size. I'm talking in terms of name power and talent recognition. Like, Shamrock was a huge deal. Now, granted, was his promo any good? Oh, God, no. It was fucking awful. The minute he opened his mouth, you remember why Shamrock rarely ever did promos in the WWF. It's because he sucked at them. I always forget, though, didn't he technically start training in wrestling around the same time he started in the MMA? What was the Japanese promotion he worked for? The shoot-style wrestling promotion where guys like Sayama and Yoshiaki Fujiwara worked for. So he had already, I think, been in the wrestling bubble a few years before he got signed by Vince, which is probably why he was such a natural fit. And I know his WWF run wasn't considered the greatest in retrospect. I personally think he was a missed opportunity in terms of how far Vince was willing to push him. I mean, you think about guys like Brock Lesnar especially, like when he came back for his second run after the UFC thing, like how many times did Vince put the world title on him over a 5 to 6 year stretch? Remember, that's when everybody got all bent out of shape over the whole part-time world champion thing, where Lesnar held the belt hostage for like over a year. He only worked a handful of dates. And all the other guys were fighting for either the secondary world titles or mid-card belts. God, what a disastrous period that was. The reason I use Brock as the example, though, is because, you know, he and Shamrock really aren't all too dissimilar in terms of the MMA, WWF, or WWE crossover. I know Brock started in the WWE before the UFC run. But I always look back and wonder how things would have been different had Vince been willing to give Shamrock a run with the belt at some point in like 98. Because I remember him getting pretty damn over later on. And you think about the Austins and the Rocks and the Foleys, the Undertakers of the world. I mean, those guys all worked well with each other. But Shamrock could work too, man. Yeah, his style was a little unorthodox, which may have explained why Vince was so tentative with wanting to have him work with the tippy-top main event guys. I don't know. It always kind of bothered me never getting to see Shamrock have a run with the WWF title at any point. He just seems so tailor-made for that role. And it never happened, unfortunately. Again, part of it could have been the promo. But that's why managers existed back in the day. It could have been the stiffer style, too. There's probably a backstory. I know Ken was a bit of a whack job himself, so Maybe it was a trust issue on Vince's part. A lot of factors that could have played into the situation. But he got through the promo to the best of his ability. Then Austin appeared on the giant Jumbotron to start ranting and raving at both Shamrock and Bret Hart. I do have to concede, they did a good job timing the live feed with this obviously pre-taped Austin promo. Especially for a guy like Shamrock who was green and inexperienced when it came to doing this kind of stuff. I thought he did very well lining up everything to match the pre-tape with Austin. And so, well, out comes Bret. And this part of the segment, I have to admit, was pretty awesome. If for anything, it continued to further validate everything I've ever said about Montreal. That it was, and still, in my opinion, is the greatest work shoot in the history of professional wrestling. I've sung it chapter and verse for well over a year now and doing these retro Raw reviews. But seriously, if you can't see the writing on the wall, you need to go back and listen to these old Raw reviews from like the build between WrestleMania 12 up through Survivor Series 97. All the stuff they've been doing with Bret Hart in the lead up to that show. I mean, how many documentaries and topical discussions have been done about the whole Montreal screw job? The WWE propaganda for years that everything about Montreal is legit. There were no insider ruses to try to throw the fans' sense off. Trust me, they're not getting any of this past me with the Bret Hart getting screwed mantra. Especially when it got to the part where he's talking about all the different guys in the WWF that have screwed him over since he came back last year. And the very last guy he mentions just happens to be Vince McMahon. Come on, bro. That was not pure accident. The dramatic pause for effect spoke volumes. They knew what they were doing here. He and Vince were in on it. We can stop pretending. And it was by and large the entire premise of what he talked about here. He also addressed one of the bigger gaping plot holes that's been relatively unaddressed since the night after In Your House when Bret lost the WWF title to Sid on Raw. The fact that Bret is only now getting a chance to come out to talk about it. Which would be a fair point if it weren't the case that Bret's already been given promo time in the last couple weeks anyway. So why didn't he address losing the belt then? What was stopping him? So he vowed that he would win the belt back next week in the cage. Then he started talking about the submission match with Austin at WrestleMania, which led to one of the best inadvertent reaction shots I think I've ever seen. Whoever was in the production truck and cued the facial reaction at Shamrock here, they deserve an Emmy Award. It was beautiful timing. When Bret mentioned how nobody in the World Wrestling Federation knows submission holds better than him, to which they immediately put the camera on Shamrock, who's looking at Bret like, hello? Former mixed martial arts specialist here. I know a thing or two about submission holds myself, dude. It was so incredibly well done. And of course, Bret is totally clueless because he's still in the middle of ranting and raving. But Ken being so passive-aggressive about it, Bret talking about being a submission specialist. Oh, that was so awesome. I rewound that back several times. But yeah, he told Shamrock that he had no issues with him unless he decided to try to intervene and cost Bret the match at WrestleMania. To which Shamrock replied by saying that he's not a marriage counselor. He's not here to listen to Bret bitch and moan about his personal problems. He's only there at WrestleMania to make a decision on who wins. So that led to Austin appearing at the top of the ramp before they cut away. Of course, it didn't actually lead to anything. It was more of that dick teasing where they leave you on a cliffhanger and then come back and cut to something completely unrelated. There's probably an industry term for it. I just call it dick teasing because I think it's funny. But anyway, I want to try and move on here because we're already running long and we still need to talk about the main event. We had Aldo Montoya versus Billy Gunn. Indeed. I'm sorry. I got nothing, dude. What do you want me to say? It was Aldo Montoya versus Billy Gunn. Of course it fucking sucked. What else did you expect? The only notable thing about it was Billy Gunn showing up here with a new look. The more traditional Billy Gunn look that I think a lot of us would be accustomed to seeing. The bleach blonde, longer hair. Pre-badass Billy Gunn, kinda. He still technically wasn't Rockabilly yet, even though Honky Tonk Man was out there putting him over on commentary. He won with a top rope leg drop in about 2 minutes. The finish came when Sonny was in a split screen plugging shotgun Saturday night, making obscene comments about being undercover. And I don't mean in the sense of her being a detective, if you know what I mean. Yeah, she, Oh, never mind. We know what she meant. Anyone that tries to ever claim it's sexist to say women are traditionally viewed as beauty objects to men, I present case in point, ladies and gentlemen. Sonny in the WWF circa 1997, where every single fucking segment involving her had some sort of sexual and or provocative reference. I don't make the rules. I just call balls and strikes as I seize them. We had Goldust versus Tits McGee, or something like that. I don't care. Goldust went with the curtain call in about a minute. Now, we had learned that Chyna was apparently arrested, in addition to her being escorted out of the building earlier. She was then allegedly put in handcuffs and taken away to the loony bin. None of which was ever caught on camera, by the way. So, knowing that, guess what happened? Yup. She shows right back up during this segment to confront Marlena and Goldust after the match. No cops. No security. Nobody to stop her. She just marched down the rampway totally untouched. How did she get in? Where did she come from? How did she get to the back? Nobody fucking knows. And then after having gotten the better of Marlena on 2 straight occasions, where she showed up and muscled her around like a rag doll, well, they arguably killed the Chyna gimmick right here without even knowing it. As she and Hunter stomped Goldust into oblivion, Marlena charged at Chyna, jumped onto her back to put her in a sleeper hold. Chyna failed to overpower this puny woman, and the only reason she broke free of the hold was because a bunch of agents ran down and pulled Marlena off of her. And so, not only did Marlena conquer her fear of the big bad Amazon, but they basically left Chyna limp dick by the end of the whole thing. as she left the ring after being outmatched by a girl half her size. Oh, and she also called her a slut, which... Great. More derogatory slander for no reason. Now, if you were going to do this, you know where the payoff would have been perfectly suited? The whole thing of Marlena getting revenge on Chyna after weeks of being intimidated and humiliated. Maybe that WrestleMania pay-per-view they've been building to between Hunter and Goldust. That might have seemed like an apropos time to pay off the revenge angle. Let the babyfaces get their redemption. But hey, who knows? Call me outlandish. Perhaps I'm one of those marks that doesn't know shit from apple butter about what I'm talking about, right? Nah, let's just have the babyfaces get the better of the heels on free TV 2 weeks before the match. Because we're all fucking morons. So then we had the debate segment between Paulie and Jerry Lawler. They had kind of set the whole thing up earlier when they shot the angle with Taz and Sabu. They mentioned that Lawler and Heyman were going to have a debate over whether or not ECW should even exist. And that was the foundation for the discussion panel here. And not even so much the principle of whether or not ECW should exist. It's a question of whether or not it does exist in its current form, according to Lawler. And you know, I'm not about to sit here and go over every detail here with a fine-tooth comb. To me, it's not even worth the energy or the hassle. Whatever you want to make of this word shoot, these stupid Russo-based reality TV scripted segments where we're all supposed to think that they're breaking kayfabe and saying shit that shouldn't be said out loud because it's forbidden language. To me, it's whatever at this point. I mean, we've seen so much fourth wall breaking throughout wrestling over the years. It's like kicking a dead horse. And while, yes, I will agree that the delivery between Lawler and Heyman here sounded passionate. That was always one of Paul's greatest attributes, was his ability to make everything sound and look believable. Even if you knew deep down he was either lying or doing something to manipulate a storyline. Like the part where they're talking about ECW drawing 1,100 people in bingo halls around the Philly area because they're the only kind of audience that would show up to watch ECW live. You know, Paul's talking about how they earned the admiration of those 1,100 people because they were the loyal fans that came to show their love and support for wrestling. Hey, I'll tell you, Paul did a great job convincing you, the viewer, that it was a good thing to be drawing a small niche audience to see a bunch of guys set each other on fire or smash each other in the face with frying pans. I might think it's retarded, but Paul made you think that it was legit. But again, the whole idea behind it was already silly to begin with. And it didn't make things any better when you've got all the ECW guys coming out to get in Lawler's face. Of course, none of them are actually going to get physical with Lawler. They're all just standing around like spare pricks at the wedding. With fucking fat slob Sandman there with his beer gut hanging through his shirt. It just came off so low rent. And it's why I never liked anything about the concept of ECW or what the promotion represented. And to me, that was another problem that arose when I saw this whole thing go down. Who the hell were the baby faces and heels here? Were we supposed to hate Paul's group and cheer for all the WWF guys? Because, hey, at least Paul's group bothered to show up to defend him in the honor of ECW. Lawler couldn't even get his guys to come out to confront these invaders. So I don't even know who the hell I was supposed to root for. That's why I've always hated these styles of promos where you can't tell who the good guy or the bad guy is. It's all this 50 Shades of Grey bullshit where you're supposed to pick and choose sides depending on what side of the fence you fall on. And that's just intentionally splitting the audience down the middle, which is a horrible way to drum up any kind of meaningful storyline. It's confusing. It's irrational. I just didn't get the point of what this was designed to accomplish. It probably got over with the insiders. But again, dude, catering to niche audiences, which was not the core WWF fan base, even for this time. And the lasting impression I got coming out of this was all the WWF guys were too cowardly to come to defend Lawler. Probably because he's been a heel for the last how many years and been a thorn in everybody's side. Which then begs the question, why was Jerry at the forefront of this storyline? Why was he the one leading the WWF in the battle for supremacy? Shouldn't it have been somebody like Vince? A promoter that the talent roster at least somewhat respected around this time and didn't completely despise? Just so many questions that were never factored in, unfortunately. It was like we had this idea in our hand. Do we really know where we want to go with it? Not really. But hey, let's do it anyway, because it'll get a reaction. Which I guess again was apropos for the time. But let's talk about Mankind and Vader versus Sid and Undertaker and then get the fuck out of here. They had about 10 minutes left of airtime when they started the match. So you already knew it was going to be rushed all to hell. And that was with the apparent overtime they were given to finish the match. So they started with the heels double-teaming Sid before Taker came out. And when Taker did finally come out to join the fight, it turned into one of those, I think it's a regular tag match, but there's no attempt at trying to enforce any rules matches. So it was essentially tornado style for the first several minutes, where everybody's brawling and Hebner's standing around letting it all happen. So it eventually settles down into a regular tag match. The heels took turns working over Sid. As we're getting toward the finish, you knew it was self-evident that things were going to spiral out of control between Taker and Sid. Now, of course, did them turning on one another have any sense of logic to it? Well, look at the head writer for the time and tell me the words Russo and or logic were ever used in the same sentence together. No, of course they randomly turned on each other for no discernible reason. And despite Sid and Taker both laying each other out with their finishes, they were still able to single-handedly beat the fuck out of Mankind and Vader easily with no issues. The number one contenders for the tag belts, I might add. And the only reason the heels won were due to Sid laying out Taker with a jackknife powerbomb, to which, after Vader got the win over Taker, he then tried to go up to give him the Vader bomb, which Sid then cut off at the last second so Taker could get up and make his comeback before the show ended. So let's recap. The two guys wrestling for the WWF title in Mania were paired together in a tag match that they themselves earlier on said they had no interest in doing. And then after agreeing that they wouldn't team in Seg 1, they not only wind up teaming together anyway, but then they proceed to both screw each other over, yet still made a concerted effort to save one another at the very end to prevent further injury. Does anybody have any idea what the fuck is going on here? What is this fucking story? I watched the entire show start to finish. I thoroughly watched these segments. I did not pause. I did not leave the room. I was practically glued to my screen, watching everything as it unfolded. I still had no idea what was going on between Undertaker and Sid through the entire program. And much like how I have no idea who's supposed to be face and heel when it comes to the WWF versus ECW stuff, I have no idea who's face and who's heel with the Undertaker-Sid feud. Taker, I assume, is a face. I mean, he's been a face for as long as we've been doing these Retro Raw reviews. Sid's flipped between face and heel so much in the last 5 months, I don't even know at this stage where he falls. It's all befuddling. Kind of like how this entire show is befuddling. It was a program filled with a ridiculous amount of content. And you know what? That doesn't always mean it's a good thing. More is not always better. Which is a good description for a lot of the content we saw through the late 90s. More does not always equate to better television. Just because you can hypothetically cram in 50 plus segments in 2 hours does not mean you should. But that is a lesson the WWF would have to learn the hard way. Or at least until Russo left. There you go. God, that was a long show. So, I'm going to do a rapid fire editing and get this thing at least scheduled for upload on Monday. Because like I said, I'm not going to have any free time tomorrow to get anything in order. So everybody, thanks for watching the show. I appreciate it. The Raw is War era has officially begun. And boy, is it going to be a trudge to get through a lot of these shows. But we're going to have fun with it. The shows might suck, but that doesn't mean that these reviews have to suck. We're going to have fun with it. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you all soon in a week when we get back to the Retro Raw reviews. Take care and peace out.